Welcome to How to Fix It. I'm John Avlon, and the purpose of this podcast is to focus on finding solutions to the problems we face, not just endlessly fixating on those problems. And a lot of the action is occurring in the states, the laboratories of democracy, where governors get to implement their ideas, sometimes against fierce federal headwinds, and see what works and lay the groundwork for perhaps the next presidential campaign. My guest this week is Governor of Maryland, Wes Moore. He's a military veteran, a nonprofit executive, and someone who in the helm of Maryland has managed to lower crime, invest in a national or state service program, and also rebuild a destroyed bridge in record time. He's also been in a lot of recent tussles with President Trump. To discuss all that and more, it's my great pleasure to welcome Wes Moore to How to Fix It.
Great to be with you, John. Always, man.
Thank you, my friend. Listen, I want to start off by talking about a tussle you've been in with President Trump. Not the social media fights, but his sort of threatening to send the National Guard into Baltimore, which I just noticed an article in The Guardian today. Violent crime is at an all-time low in Baltimore. Murder rate's been cut around 40% since 2020. So what do you think he's talking about?
Honestly, I'm deeply offended by what he is doing, and personally offended. As someone who, unlike the president of the United States, has actually served, and served in combat, led soldiers in combat, for him to use the National Guard in such a theatrical way, and such a, frankly, just nakedly political way is just very deeply offensive. And I think about the members of the National Guard, and I feel bad for them. I feel bad for their family members. I feel bad that they're being used this way, that they're being used as these political pawns, in frankly, a very cynical game that the president of the United States is doing. Because this idea of deploying the National Guard inside of our American cities, it is not sustainable. He's now costing the American taxpayer well over $1 million a day. And do you know what these Guard members are doing right now? They're literally picking up trash. They're mulching. They're raking mulch. Like, over $1 million a day. That's what these National Guardsmen are being asked to do, because they're not trained in doing municipal policing. The second thing, it's not sustainable. You're not going to send the National Guard to every major American city, particularly every major American city that the data doesn't reinforce them being there, but you just want to pick and choose which ones you want to start fights with. And not to mention the fact that it's unconstitutional. And so we're doing this game with these men and women and violating the trust with their families, violating the trust that they put inside of this chain of command. And for what? And so that's why I have just been very vocal, and I will continue to be very vocal in saying that this is a distraction from the fact that his policies are continuing to make everything more expensive in people's lives. And I, as the commander in chief of the Maryland National Guard and someone who actually takes that role seriously, I will not authorize our National Guard and for our men and women to be used as political tools and political pawns, and especially in a mission that I do not deem to be mission critical or mission aligned.
Crime is an issue that gets exploited. Sometimes Democrats are accused not taking crime seriously. But that's why I want to highlight the fact that in Baltimore, violent crimes are at an all-time low. Homicides have been cut by 40%. So I want to ask you on how to fix it. How'd you do it? How's it being done in Baltimore by the police chief and the mayor there?
Well, it is something that we have made our highest priority. I came on board when I said, if you look at 2022, the year before I became the governor, Baltimore was averaging about a homicide a day. If you look at the 8 years before I became the governor under my predecessor, the homicide rate nearly doubled during his time. The non-fatal shooting rate did double. So there was a crisis. But we said we were going to address the crisis with the seriousness that it was required. And so what did we do? How did we fix it? And how do we make sure that we're doing the work to fix it? We made historic investments in local law enforcement. The largest investments in local law enforcement in our state's history. We allocated over $50 million to the Baltimore City Police Department alone, just making sure we can get more boots on the ground and making sure that people were trained. The second thing we did was we made historic investments in technology and predictive analytics and actually information sharing. And so basically saying you could stop crime before it happened. And if someone committed a violent crime, particularly with a firearm, I want them in handcuffs in 24 hours. And also we made historic investments in community groups, community violence intervention groups. And we're working with the mayor, working with the state's attorney, making Maryland one of the only states in the country that now helps to fund the U.S. attorney out of balance sheet. So we took a completely all of the above approach when it came to using data and data-backed and evidence-based measures to be able to address the issues of public safety. And you're absolutely right. Since I've been the governor, we are now seeing how the homicide rate in the state of Maryland is down over 20% since I have been the governor. And you want to talk about not just short-term changes or short-term, alterations. I can give you some numbers that are year-on-year numbers, not week-on-week, year-on-year, where the homicide rate in the state of Maryland is down 24%, Baltimore City down 30%, that auto thefts are down statewide 24% and Baltimore City down 33%, that juvenile homicides in the state of Maryland are down 38%. That we are watching historic drops in these numbers, and they are sustainable. And it's because we have taken an all of the above approach and started working with all of our partners and taking this seriously and not doing theatrics like we're hearing from the White House right now.
That's the big difference, right? It's investment, it's sustained strategy. It's not the politicizing of troops and the theatrics around it, but crime is an issue we got to get right. You don't get the big things right, small things don't matter. I want to talk about something that's been a signature issue of yours, hasn't gotten as much national attention yet, but it's your investment, Maryland's investment in service year, in basically a statewide version of national service to give young folks work experience, to help sort of maybe create a model for what could be done nationally in a more expanded way. Tell us about service year, which you inherited from your predecessor, but really expanded and have made a signature issue for your administration.
Absolutely. And in fact, it actually wasn't something that we inherited. We actually came on board and I said that, that especially when you think about the conditions that we find ourselves in, where we said we have to address the unemployment rate, where, for example, Maryland was ranked 43rd in the country in unemployment when I first became the governor. And said, if you really want to address the issue of unemployment, especially of a younger population, if you want to address the issue of workforce development and giving people a chance to find the thing that makes their heartbeat faster, and in this time of this political divisiveness and vitriol, I believe that service will save us. That service is sticky, and those who serve together stay together. And so we campaigned on it. And one of the first bills that I signed was actually making Maryland the first state in the country that now offers a service year option to our high school graduates. So high school graduates in the state of Maryland now have a chance to have a year of paid service in something that drives them. So whether they are working on supporting veterans, whether they are working on housing insecurity, whether they're working on older adults, whether they're working with young people, whether they're working with animals or the environment, we just say, tell us what makes your heart beat faster. And we will give you a pathway to go do it. And watching the results that we have seen in our state, and not just the tangible results of, for example, Maryland has now gone from 43rd in the country in unemployment when I first took over to now having amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country for a year and a half straight. We have seen how young people are now taking their future in their own hands and working together, building together. And so I'm just a big believer that Maryland will be, can be, and should be the state that serves. And I believe that service is going to be the thing that's going to end up saving us all.
Service is obviously core to your life and your rise. What are some of the specifics? I mean, you say whatever makes your heart beat faster, but are you deploying them in areas that you deem mission critical for the quality of life, for the rebuilding of Baltimore, Maryland, rural development, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. And honestly, John, it's one of the great things that we've seen where we have these service year option students. They are all over the state. They're in Western Maryland. We had service year option students that were helping with the historic floods that we saw in Western Maryland. We've got them working in Frederick County, working in child development. We had, and the great thing is that these are young people from all over the state and from all different walks of life. During our first year, we had one group that was working together. One was a young man who was doing a deferment year in West Point. And so said he wanted to do a service year before he went on to a service academy, working in partnership with another young man who got his GED while he was incarcerated and got a GED. Now they're working together on
That's cool.
projects. Like, I love this idea that is bringing together young people from so many different backgrounds. And now these are people who are like, these are like family now. And I think about what it looked like even when I was, serving, when I came back from Afghanistan, and when I decided I was running for governor, there were people who I served with in Afghanistan who came and campaigned for me, campaigned on my behalf. Many of them were not Marylanders. Many of them were not Democrats, but they simply were coming to knock on people's doors and saying, I just want to tell you a little bit about the guy that I served with. That's the power of service, is that it's sticky. And when people are in difficult situations together, generally it turns into a bond that becomes completely unforgettable, and where people then will ride for each other for the remainder of their days. And that's exactly what the Service Your Option is instilling. And while it started in Maryland under our watch, I'm really thankful for the fact that it's not going to end there. And we're now watching other states that are doing the same type of programs and projects in their own states.
Well, that's the test, the laboratories of democracy. And it does break down the barriers and answer a real need for making sure that we've got a kind of civic commitment. Do you see an expanded version of national service? We just talked to Stan McChrystal the other day on this podcast. Do you think an expanded version of national service would be appropriate on a national level?
I think that if we could get a nation to understand how important it is to give a little bit of yourself for the nation that you belong to and serve, it would help this entire country. I think I absolutely would endorse a real platform of turning service into something that maybe it can start with states, but then eventually having a real national conversation about what it means to have the option for everybody to give a little bit of themselves to a country that they should all have a vested interest in belonging to and believing in and serving. I think it changes the entire culture and the entire landscape of who we are and what it is that we hope to be. So I love the work that General McChrystal has done, both in and out of uniform, to be able to serve this nation. But I think the thesis of giving people a chance to serve and to be part of something bigger than themselves is not just going to be revolutionary for our country. I think it's actually going to be very healing for our country as well.
I couldn't agree more. I want to talk to you about the Francis Scott Key Bridge. This was sort of the key crisis of your first year in office. Bridge decimated by a boat that was out of control. Now, you've got it on path to get rebuilt in a shorter time than it was originally built, something that doesn't always happen. Talk to us just about the mechanics at a time when we're talking about, how you streamline over-regulation, red tape so we can get back building again. How you've done that with the Key Bridge in Maryland.
Well, and it's funny, John, because, one thing I've learned in this job, that when my phone rings in the middle of the night, no one's ever about to give me good news. And, that happened on, March 26th, a year and a half ago, when we heard that this ship, that was the size of 3 football fields, slammed into the iconic Key Bridge, and the bridge collapsed. A nearly 2-mile long bridge that was now sitting at the bottom of the Patapsco River. And it closed the port of Baltimore, which is responsible for about 13% of my state's economy. That thousands of port workers were about to realize they no longer had a job. And there were 6 workers who were fixing potholes in the middle of the night who lost their lives that night. And we said to the people that we would stop at nothing to make sure that we're bringing closure and comfort to those families. And we were able to recover. It took 5 weeks, but we were able to cover all 6 of the bodies of the individuals we lost, and able to give the families the closure that they were hoping for. That we were able to make sure that all of our port workers and small businesses were supported and taken care of in that time. And when they told us it was going to take 11 months just to clear the federal channel, we got it cleared in 11 weeks. And I remember having those early conversations after Maryland kind of really put on a case study on how to respond in these moments of crisis, where people said, I asked, how long is it going to take to rebuild the bridge? It's a nearly 2-mile long bridge. And the answer was, well, permitting alone could take 2 years. And the original bridge took over 10 to be able to build. And we have said, again, we will stop at nothing to make sure that we get this thing done, and done fast, on behalf of the people of our state. And so we're thankful for the support that we've gotten from Congress, where Congress, on a bipartisan basis, Democrats and Republicans, voted to make sure that it's 100% cost share. And so in addition to the capital that the state is putting in, the federal government is also doing essentially a bridge loan to the people of the state of Maryland while we are moving fast to build this bridge. That we've been able to move a lot of the regulatory red tape and a lot of things that always kind of gum up and slow up a process where just the permitting normally takes a couple years. We got it done in months. And we're already now in the process of completing the final demos and now starting to rebuild the bridge. And so we believe, and I believe deeply that while they told us it took 10 years to build it initially, during our time, we will be able to look up and look at the Francis Scott Key Bridge again. And that's going to be a moment of very real pride to the people of the state of Maryland. And frankly, should be a moment of pride to the people of this country.
It's enormous what you can do when you focus the mind and you get past some of the bureaucratic hurdles. It does set a model and maybe a way forward to actually implement the abundance agenda, albeit this becoming in a crisis. You know, you mentioned that day, and of course, President Biden at the time immediately called and said, "Whatever you need." And it does raise a question about how you navigate a personality like Donald Trump. You and Gavin Newsom to a greater extent have been not afraid to tussle with President Trump on social media, making your claim in the attention economy. At the same time, you got to make sure you're working with him. You know, you got bipartisan legislation out of Congress, but as a governor, you got responsibilities to make sure that the federal government's supporting the people of your state. How do you walk that line? How do you navigate that?
You know, I remember right after the election, I said to the people of my state that, that here in the state of Maryland, we honor election results. And here in the state of Maryland, I said, as your governor, my promise is I'm always going to fight for the people of my state. But I was very clear to the people of my state that I will work with anyone, but I will bow down to no one. That's not how I'm built. And I will work with anybody who has the best interest of my people at heart. But the challenge that we have seen thus far is if you just look in the first months, of the Trump administration, that these are not glancing blows at Maryland. These are direct shots. That right now we've had over 12,000 Marylanders fired by Donald Trump, who are federal workers, people who are doing things like making sure that our food is safe, who are doing things like cancer research, doing things like making sure that our critical infrastructure is protected. Over 12,000 Marylanders. That's the largest amount of firings of any state in this country. That the President of the United States, when we had historic floods out in Western Maryland, that we didn't just hit, but exceeded the benchmark of what normally qualifies for federal disaster relief, that we received indication from the president that support for Maryland is not warranted. We have tens of millions of dollars of damage right now in Allegheny and Garrett County in Western Maryland, which, by the way, are generally historically Republican areas, and the city that was most impacted by a city called Westernport, their annual budget is $2 million. And they have tens of millions of dollars of damage. But the federal government has said, you're on your own. So what's
the logic they're giving? You think that President Trump's just politicizing FEMA to punish Maryland?
I think that many of these decisions that Donald Trump is making, and I've said this to him, I think they are petty. I think they are partisan, and I think they are punishing. And so I do think that, the approach that the president has taken to the state of Maryland, is just deeply disappointing because it is hyper partisan. And so, I know that when I think about what we are going to do and what we have to do in the state of Maryland, one of the reasons I'm so proud of how Maryland has responded despite all this, despite the fact that Donald Trump has fired more Marylanders than any other state, we still, our unemployment rate, because we've been creative about moving our federal workers into available state jobs, moving them into classrooms to serve as teachers, into hospitals to serve as nurses, and reducing the red tape and streamlining their employment, that we've been able to keep Maryland at a 3.4% unemployment rate, which is almost a full point lower than the national average, despite the fact that Maryland has lost more jobs than any other state inside this country. And so I'm excited that Maryland has been able to be creative and resilient and fast moving to be able to address this. But there is no doubt in my mind the partisan impact of this administration and the nakedly partisan impact of this administration has been staggering for the state of Maryland.
It's extraordinary. The unemployment rate is what it is, given those headwinds. Sounds like you're implementing some of the abundance agenda with regulation. I want to talk with you though. You're running for re-election right now. One of the puzzling things about our particular time is Donald Trump's numbers are cratering with independents as he overreaches in a hyper-partisan way, but the Democratic numbers aren't rising. And I just wonder what your thoughts are about the direction the Democratic Party should be taking. I'm talking about two issues. One, there's a lot of division right now around Israel and Gaza. There was a resolution that the DNC, tabled because they couldn't, agree on a resolution around a two-state solution. 26 members of the Senate didn't vote for rearming Israel out of concerns about humanitarian situation in Gaza. That is a fraught issue. And good people can disagree, but the facts on the ground are compelling to folks. Understandably, what is your read on that issue right now?
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking issue, and it's a really challenging and it's a complicated issue because first of all, as someone who's served overseas and led soldiers in combat, I am under no illusion about the dangers of Hamas and the dangers of Hezbollah. And no one can explain to me anything different where I just think that, Hamas and they are not a fair or a true negotiating partner, in any of this. I know that when we're talking about believing in, that we should be able to have a safe, and independent, and a secure Israel, is deeply important. I also know that what we are seeing, overseas and the lack of any concern of these humanitarian crises that we're seeing from Bibi Netanyahu is just deeply troubling. When I think about the service that I did overseas, things like, starvation is not a war tactic. And we have to be very clear and to be very honest about that. And especially for people who do believe in the long-term stability of the state of Israel. That you cannot focus on, winning a war if simultaneously you're losing the world. And so I do think it does become very important about how we are approaching, how this is all being approached, going forward. And I think the concerns that a lot of people have are fair and they're justified and people have to wrestle with them. And I think it goes back to, kind of a larger point, that was also said about, about the Democratic Party as well is, I think, we have to be a party that does leave room for debate, and for people to, as you correctly pointed out, to have your position and to agree and disagree and think about what does that mean to have a tent big enough that all these ideas can be held within. But I also think that, the reason that the Democratic Party oftentimes is having difficulties is not because of a messaging problem. It's actually a results problem. It's the fact that for so many people, who exist in our society, if they're not seeing the results for what you are hoping for and promising for, then you're going to lose them no matter what your message is. That the reason that I say as a party, we've got to stop being the party of no and slow and start being the party of yes and now. Like start getting work done.
Yeah.
Start beating expectations. Focus on employment. Focus on, that pathways to work and wages and wealth. If you can do that, your messaging problem is no longer going to be a problem. Because what Donald Trump has done so well is he has become a fantastic vessel for the frustration. For people who are frustrated with the system, for people who do not think the system works, Donald Trump is a remarkable vessel for the frustration. What he is not is a vehicle for the solution. That's where the Democratic Party must come in. And we can be the vehicle for the solution, but we've got to start learning how to move faster and move with a kind of urgency that people's pain is actually being felt with as well.
We got to show that democracy can deliver for working people and rebuild the middle class and I believe the middle of our politics. Let me close you on this question because there is a debate. You're running for re-election. Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill running in New Jersey and Virginia. Mamdani occupies a lot of oxygen. there's a debate whether the party should go further left or move to the center and reach out. The reality is, when you look at the results of the 2024 race, Kamala Harris surprisingly lost ground. Democratic Party lost ground, even and especially in communities of color, immigrants, young men. In addition, when you look at those deficits that don't seem like they would normally attract support from a Donald Trump, and the Democratic Party not really understanding how or why it happened. Do you double down on identity politics, or do you try to move away from it? What's your prescription when you look at those losses as how to regain some of that lost ground?
Yeah, it's interesting, John, because I feel like in many ways the Democrats, the fact that the Democrats who ran in 2024 lost ground with this group or that group. One, I think it is important to remember that the candidate does matter, and the campaign the candidate ran does matter. Right. So when we're talking about individual races, people say, in individual races in many ways is kind of like a fingerprint, right? It's very individual, and you can't make too much about what that means when you're looking at an individual race. However, when you're losing certain groups during election years, it means you lost them a whole lot earlier than that. That's not the head, that's the tail. And I do think when we're talking about, for example, taking young men, there was a long time that we just stopped talking to them. And then it started becoming, we're talking about them or at them. And so I think that, so part of the thing that, we've been able to see, and when people looked at our election results, and, we bucked a lot of trends. We did very well with young voters in our campaign. We did very well with young men in our campaign. We did very well with demographics who oftentimes do not turn out to vote. And people say, well, what did you guys do? And, what was your messaging and this and that? And I said, honestly, the truth is that I think they saw authenticity. They saw the fact that we were actually serious about being able to work to address the very real frustrations that they're actually feeling in their lives. And I think we've been able to follow up. It's like when you see that Maryland is now, really taking a national lead when it comes to addressing the issue of young men and boys. And not just with talk, with actual policies and bills. When you see the fact that, we signed the largest mass pardon in the history of the United States of America, when I pardoned over 175,000 misdemeanor cannabis convictions. And by the way, much of that was led by a lot of the young people who were part of our movement, who were telling us the importance of this and how damaging it was to people to basically serving a life sentence for a misdemeanor cannabis conviction. Right? That the policy move we made was because it was driven by the young people who were actually involved in our movement. And so I think that, that we just have to start identifying and remembering that the people, if they feel you are authentic, and if they feel that you're genuinely gonna work with them and not just speak about them, that they'll come on board and they'll stay. But they have to feel like it's real. And if they don't, then we will always be having these post-mortem conversations and saying, how did we lose that demographic this time around? And it's oftentimes it's because you spoke about them like they're a demographic.
It's about the authenticity. It's about delivering results for real people, and breaking down barriers, and reaching out. Governor Wes Moore, Maryland, congratulations on accumulating an impressive record and on the re-election ahead, and much more.
Thank you.
Thank
you, brother.
Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you, man.